Welcome back, everybody. We're going to get stuck into session number 2, which is the projects with a estimated total cost of under $250,000. Like we said, if you've got a category that is over, a project that is over $250,000, we'll be running a session especially for you in about half an hour's time, 40 minutes time. So hang around for that one. So in this session, we're going to run through the project plan template. The project plan template was emailed out to everyone this morning and also yesterday. And if you're here with us in the room, we provided it as well in hard copy. So what's important to take away here is that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel from your expression of interest application. Much of the information you provided in that first stage will be relevant here. It's about finding the right spot to put it in and also adding some detail where necessary. So we're going to cross over some of the reference material that we're looking at here. So as we've seen, we've got the project plan template. The budget template, which is a Excel sheet, which Laura will be bringing up on the screen and walking through with everyone so you can get a feel for that. And there's also the assessment guidance as well, which shows you what areas will be assessed in each particular category. So Laura, project plan, what is it and how do we use one?
Okay, the project plan. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to have a glance through. We're going to walk through it now in quite a lot of detail anyhow. So firstly, the project plan is not only for the assessment panel to understand what your project is and how to score it, it's also a tool for you to plan your project. In the event that you're delivering the project, you should be referring back to your plan during the planning and delivery to keep on track and make sure your project is delivered on budget and on time. All applicants in stage 2 have an opportunity for success. It's the quality of your plan that will determine how well you score. So this is a key point that we want you to remember.
So section 1 of your project plan will be the case for change. So this is essentially where you're selling your idea, where you're trying to convince someone reading your application that it's a good idea that we should be supporting. And the people reading your application are the assessment panel. So keep that in mind. That's who you're writing for, the people who are assessing your application. They're people from the industry, they're people from the infrastructure industry. They understand where you are, so write for them. Make sure your response in this section covers all the points in the assessment criteria that we've had up and we've handed out as well. The best applications will mark off all of those criteria, those 4 points under each, or 4 or 5 points under each section. So there's 3 parts to a case for change in this first section. So we'll see here we've got the goal statement, we've got the strategic alignment, and we've also got the alternative approaches. Now, the goal statement defines the scope, so what your project will deliver and for what cost. Ideally, the first paragraph should be a 30-second summary. This is like the pitch you might use to sell your idea if you had 30 seconds to speak to someone about it. Sometimes it's called the executive summary, and it's probably going to be the first thing that people read when they see your application. Now, as part of this process is identifying the objective. So what are you actually trying to achieve with this project? And what we've got is a methodology called the SMART methodology that we're going to run you through, which might help you create some useful objectives for your project. And Laura's going to run you through those.
Okay, so you've probably heard of this methodology before, but this helps keep objectives short and sharp. So we'll use it as a framework. So the S stands for specific. That means don't be vague, get straight to the point. We're not looking for really lengthy explanations here, just the information that the assessors need. Okay, measurable. Measurable is a key point here. So state the success criteria or how you'll know the objective has been met. So for example, if the goal is to build more gallery space, the objective might be to provide your community with a space to display the work of local artists and raise their profile. The success criteria you use here might be that a certain number of people attend, a certain number of local artists are involved, or a certain number of revenue was increased due to the project. Another example that's more of a soft criteria might be measuring the perception of community satisfaction. This might be measured through something more like a survey or questionnaire. All right, so achievable. So be realistic. The assessors will be looking for realistic objectives. For example, don't be overly optimistic about the revenue that you might see from sales, but keep it realistic. Also relevant, so make sure you tie the objective back in with the objectives that you saw in the general session and keep the relevance so that you can show your alignment with the objectives. Lastly, make it time bound, so make sure you set a date for when it should be achieved by. Allow some contingency for periods like we're going into the Christmas period now, so that adds time on, end of financial year, other things like that. So just be mindful of that.
So back to this this case for change, there's 3 boxes here, moving over to the second one, which is strategic alignment. If you're following with your project plan, this is section 1.2. This section should start with the current situation. So this is sometimes called the base case. This is like what you've got now. And this should outline the problem you're trying to fix. Like that could be unsafe facilities, decreasing attendances, or lack of capacity, for example. Once a base case is established, you need to describe how your project is going to meet that gap or need that exists in your community. And then we can draw it all together by outlining how your project aligns with different strategies and different programs in your region. So that could mean your council's strategic plan, for example, community strategic plan. It could mean the Premier's state priorities. It could mean anything. Like if you have a specific cultural plan in your region, say how your project fits into a bigger picture. It's not just one thing that's happening, it's part of something bigger, which is a great thing to always demonstrate. Now, as I said before, much of your information from your EOI application will be relevant here. So criteria 1 from your first application will be the most relevant section here. The third box gives you alternative approaches. So basically what this means is we understand you've picked the way you want to do it, but we want to know that you've thought about other ways of doing it as well, and also explain why they're not the best ways to go forward. So if your objective is to increase attendances at your theatre, and you've put forward a way of refurbishing your current building, we want to know that you've thought about what are the costs and benefits of having a brand new theatre, what's the costs and benefits of doing a lesser scale upgrade, and whether or not what way is up and why your option is the best one out of those 3, for example. So we're not asking you to develop whole proposals for those other ideas, but at least that you've considered them and that this one is the best one for the reasons that you've outlined. We're going to move on to the section 2 of the project plan now, which is the capacity to deliver, and Laura's going to run us through that one.
Okay, capacity to deliver. This is where you need to show the assessors that you know about all the work that needs to be done to deliver your project. And you also need to show that you've done the planning and you're ready to deliver the project. This section is similar to criteria 3 from the expression of interest application, but here it's more detailed and there's a few more things that we'd like confirmed. Excuse me. Okay, so first up is the milestones. This is where you prove to the assessors that you understand all the work that's needed to be done to deliver your project. Working through the steps, you'll see that once you define the activities, you put them in the right order and then estimate how long it will take to complete and the resources needed to do that activity. So those resources are, of course, the cost, but some other things you might need to consider is who's doing it and how many people need to be involved in doing it, that sort of thing. All right.
Something to add to that section, just quickly. We had a question here before from Tom about what's the difference between the EOI application and this new one, and I explained there are some areas that require more detail. The milestone table is one of those areas. It was quite vague and sort of narrow in the EOI. This is an area that we want to see more detail on because it could be there are milestones in this particular part which could be formed part of your contract for funding at a later date. So they need to be accurate, robust, and also achievable.
Indeed. So make sure you give sufficient detail in the description area so that the assessors are not guessing and they can fully understand what each step involves. Make sure that the costs here reflect your budget, so make sure there's no discrepancy there. The milestones should be as accurate as possible and should represent a realistic work schedule that you could use in the event that you were delivering your project, and it would help you keep it on track.
next section's a fun and happy part. It's the benefits. So it's like, tell us what good your project's going to do in your community. And your community is not just your members or potential people who might come to your organisation. It's your broader community as well. And so think really broad about the benefits and where they might flow onto. One of the things I would like to include here, putting a dollar figure or a number or some sort of quantification on your benefits if you can. Some of them can't be, like goodwill or things like that, and they're good things to include. But where possible, if they're measurable, that's always a good thing, and it helps you with analysis later down the track as well. So moving on from something that's really happy to something that's a bit more morbid, but it's equally as important, which is the risk.
Indeed, still very important though, or important to show that you understand the risks specific to your project. So managing risks is sometimes called maximizing your good luck and minimizing your bad luck. This is where you need to show the assessors that you've thought about the risks that could impact your project, and you've also thought about ways you can avoid or manage those risks. Demonstrating strong risk management will go a really long way with giving the assessors confidence that you know what you're doing and you can deliver this project. Let's walk through the table because you may not all be familiar with the colourful things happening there. So firstly, you identify the risk name. So talk about what it is, what would happen if it came true. It's important that an owner is always assigned to a risk, so someone who's in charge of looking out for the risk and someone who's in charge of managing it if it comes true. The next three columns relate to the risk matrix, which is the colourful box up the top. The first one is a likelihood, so you can see the likelihood on the left-hand side, and in this example it's moderate. The impact for this risk is major, and you can see where they meet in the table results in a risk rating that's high. That's how you use that area. You'll notice in the Word version that it has drop-down lists, so you can pre-populate it or pick the ones that you want. If you need to add more rows to the table, you can copy and paste those drop-down lists further. Lastly, in the last column, you need to talk about what the treatment actions would be. So what would you do to prevent this risk? And if it happens, what you'll do to manage it. In this way, you can demonstrate that you've given a thorough analysis to all the risks for your project.
Okay, moving on from risk, we're going to be talking about non-financial assumptions, and that sounds like a potentially confusing statement, but it's quite simple. Basically, it's things that don't cost money that could impact your project. So this application you're doing is mainly about achieving funding, which is obviously very, very important. However, there are things outside of this grant that can affect your project going forward, and that could be things like planning approvals. It could be decisions of your board or council or another organisation that needs to sign off on the particular project. It could be even heritage considerations. So these could have a potentially detrimental effect on your project, and we need to know that you've considered them and that you're going to manage them. So if you haven't got planning approval, what are you doing about getting it? And if you don't need it, let us know why. So you could include parts of your planning schedule and explain why your particular project doesn't need consent, therefore it's not a risk for you. That's the other part as well. These potential items could be a risk that would need to be included in your risk table as well, just like Laura spoke about in the previous slide.
Okay, governance arrangements. All right, this is the last section for capacity to deliver. This is where you need to outline who's doing what. So who's involved in your project, what are their accountabilities, who do they report to, and what are their responsibilities. This section should tell assessors the role of each person involved and what they're doing. If there is a steering committee or a company board who's involved in giving oversight, this should also be included here. This area also has a very practical application down the track, as it would be used to advise who to contact for different types of information, such as two important roles we have here. The project manager must be defined, so this is mandatory. And secondly, the cost approver, the person who's going to be managing the budget for the project and approving all the invoices as they come in, needs to be defined as well. This, in many instances, will be the project manager, but if it's not, then just talk to that here.
All right, so we're going to be moving on to I say important, but all the sections of the project plan are important as they're evenly weighted. I'll reiterate that one now because Laura mentioned at the start that all 4 criteria are evenly weighted. So while some might be more difficult than others, the areas that you find less difficult are easy to fall down in if you don't put in the effort as well. So this is a particular section that that many organisations don't put as much detail in, and is something that was identified as the panel as an area to work on in the next stage, which is, so it's essentially your budget. So this is where you demonstrate that you've allocated sufficient resources to deliver your project and that you can manage those costs as well. So so once again, ensure your response to this section covers all those points in that assessment guidance that we've handed out. We keep referring back to that, and we'll keep doing that because it's really important that we tick all those off. Because the assessors will have that in front of them when they're assessing your applications, so it's important you do the same thing. So we're going to have Laura. She's moved away from up front with me here, and she's back on the laptop, and she's going to walk you through the budget template. So what we've done is developed a Excel spreadsheet to help you do your budget, and so it makes life easy. It's already there, and it's going to be consistent across all the applicants. Laura, are you going to be able to walk us through that one now?
Yep. All right. So we have the budget template up on the screen here because we just want to get you familiar with it. But before we get started, just on the budget, this is where you need to tell the assessors what it costs to deliver your project, and also importantly, how you estimated the cost. So you need to talk about how you've done the analysis and arrived at the cost, and include any contingency allowances. What you want the assessors to walk away with after looking at your budget is that they feel confident that you have a strong understanding of the full cost, and that you can control the cost during delivery of your project. You also need to show that your project is going to be viable in the long term. Assessors will not score applications strongly if the project doesn't look viable. This is a really key point, and we can't stress this enough, so please make sure you give a thorough and accurate analysis of your ongoing operational costs. All right, let's have a walk through the template. So firstly, you'll notice there are 2 tabs here. We've got capital costs and ongoing costs. We'll skip to capital costs firstly. Couple of other things you'll notice is these large yellow hint boxes. They've got a little bit of guidance and information to help you fill out your template. And you can delete these if you click on it and then hit delete. Or if you accidentally delete one, don't worry, you can always download another copy of the budget template. Another thing is that this spreadsheet is designed so that you can't delete cells like the formula or whatnot. You can only fill in the areas that are relevant for you to fill in. And lastly, you'll notice that here is a drop-down list to choose your cost category. Oops. There we go. So please select the correct category and make sure you give a very good description here. You don't want the assessors to need to guess or question any of the amounts, so make sure that you give a really thorough analysis.
In this section, you can include details like your quote number or the name of the organisation who gave you the quote, or what sort of work's going to be carried out for that particular dollar cost. It's all about making the assessors understand what that cost is and trying to avoid putting bulk costs for large things. If you have an itemised quote, break it down in the budget as well, so the assessors understand what's being delivered for what cost.
Okay, also on quotes, you'll note that there's some guidance that you need to have a quote for each key cost. The quotes will need to be provided as well as supporting documents. There's more information about this in the template. Okay, moving on through the template, the next section is contingency. So you do need to allow contingency for your project that's closely related to the risks. So if things were to go wrong, if timelines slip or whatnot, make sure you do give a description here. However, you'll notice in the project plan template, there's also a section where you need to give a breakdown and analysis of how you arrived at your contingency amounts. You've only got annual amounts here, so you may need to break them down further to explain why you've used that amount. All right, lastly, down the bottom here is the funding section. So this is where you detail the amount of funding that you're going to be using to deliver your project. So please note that all the costs here are specifically to deliver your project. This section does not cover ongoing costs. The ongoing costs are on the next tab, and we'll get to that shortly. So the funding here, particularly the amount that you're asking for from the Regional Cultural Fund, this is for delivery of the project. Make sure you outline any other funding sources that you do have. Once again, similar to the expression of interest stage, demonstrating strong co-investment or co-funding from other areas is going to be viewed favourably. Okay, let's move to ongoing costs. Okay, the ongoing cost section is where you show the assessors that your operation is viable into the future. Just a note that all the ongoing costs must be covered by your organisation or funding aside from the Regional Cultural Fund. So we'll just flick through it here. This is, once again, you have the drop-down list. Make sure you give a thorough description and your costs going into the future. Down here is where you show where the funding is coming from to cover these costs. We've put in a few different categories, and also note here that you need to confirm whether or not the funding is confirmed.
All right, thank you, Laura, for running us through that one. So we're going to be moving on from the budget. I just want to touch on, just reiterate one point that Laura mentioned as well. So the costs for your project are going to have to be in that first section, the capital cost. So everything related to your project is in that first section. So that's all of the one-time expenses that are related to your project. Anything else like the maintenance that might come around of it, the staff that fill it, exhibition costs, all that other stuff that's not related but not part of your project for the purpose of the fund must go in the ongoing costs. I hope we'll be providing further detail about the budget going forward, but that's just a key point that sort of people kept asking throughout the EOI stage about the sort of where's the line between your project and it going forward. So the next section is engagement and reach. So I mentioned before about sections potentially being easier, but the same sort of, they're all weighted the same. This section could potentially be easy if you've done a lot of work in it, but it's also a section where you could potentially fall down. And if you don't do it correctly and fully, it's 25% of the application. So you need to focus a lot of attention on it. So there's two elements to engagement and reach. So there's first of all there's the community support for the project, and there's also the community engagement as well. So community engagement is essentially having the key stakeholders in your project identified and also how you're going to work with them. So that could mean the key stakeholders don't have to be just your members of your organisation. They could also be people who come into your organisation who you engage with on a regular basis. They could be politicians in your area. They could be other groups, other business groups, or something like that. Anyone in your community that you engage with a lot, you need to identify them and how you're going to keep them informed of the project. A key example would be if your school uses your facility regularly, have the principal down as a key stakeholder and how you're going to communicate with them about the progress of the project, because, for example, it might not be available for a certain period of time. That's the sort of thing, because it can impact your community. The next section is community support. People demonstrate community support primarily by letters of support, which is fine. That's a solid way of doing it. However, there are other ways of demonstrating support in your community, and that could be things like surveys. We have Facebook comments have even been sent through, reviews, newspaper articles, and we even had one organisation, a bake sale, and they had a bake sale to drum up support for their idea and coverage of it, which is a fantastic idea. So things you can think of outside of the box to generate some buzz and support for your project is a good thing, because we want to support projects that the community really wants. So now we have almost wrapped up this section, so we've got plenty of time for questions. Does anybody have any questions?